Settle in and let your breathing slow, because tonight you are walking down a familiar set of stairs into an unfamiliar kind of wilderness. The air changes first. It gets warmer, drier, and softly restless, as if the tunnel itself is exhaling. Above you, the city is all glass and headlights. Down here, it is concrete, vibration, and routine. You might think this is just a place for machines to pass through, but you are wrong in a gentle way. This is a man-made cave with its own weather, its own dust, and its own quiet residence. So, with the Sleepless Scientist keeping you company, let's drift through the weird ecology of urban subway tunnels, one calm detail at a time. You take the last few steps down, and the sound changes shape. On the street, noise spreads out. Down here, it stays. It ricochets off tile, steel, and old concrete, then comes back to you softened, like a voice heard through a wall. You think you are entering a simple space, a corridor for trains, but the tunnel does not behave like a hallway. It behaves like a cave that learned to wear human clothing. The first thing you notice is the air. It is not just air that happens to be underground. It has a personality. It moves with purpose, as if it has errands. In many subway systems, the tunnels run warmer than the surface for most of the year, not because the earth is whispering heat up at you, though it does contribute a steady background warmth, but because you are standing beside a machine that makes heat all day. Every train that breaks is turning motion into warmth. Every motor is shedding heat the way a tired animal sheds body warmth into the dark. The lights, the transformers, the power cables, the little boxes on the walls with warning labels, all of it leaks energy into the air, and that air does not sit politely in place. You can feel it in the way your hair stirs as a train approaches. That is not a romantic breeze. That is the tunnel being used as a lung. A moving train acts like a piston in a cylinder. It shoves a big plug of air ahead of it, then drags air behind it. It is simple physics dressed up as a commute. The same phenomenon can ventilate stations, or, if the system is poorly designed, it can move stale air around, like a tired employee refiling paperwork. You stand near the platform edge, and you feel the airflow change again, even before you see the headlights. The tunnel is announcing the train with pressure and wind. The city above sends you weather from the sky. The city below sends you weather from steel wheels. If you listen carefully, you can hear the tunnel's constant background systems working. Ventilation fans do not sound like wind in trees. They sound like something trying very hard not to overheat. They make a steady, industrial hush, the lullaby of a place designed to move crowds without cooking them. But the tunnel air is not just heat and motion. It is also history, suspended in tiny particles. Every time a train rolls, its wheels meet the rails with enormous force. Metal on metal, over and over, day after day. Even when everything is functioning normally, that contact sheds microscopic debris. The rails slowly lose themselves. The wheels slowly lose themselves. Brake pads, too, contribute their own dust, ground down by friction, until they become a fine, dark powder. You do not usually see it as it forms. It is too small, too light, too busy riding invisible currents. But you can see the results. The soot-like film on surfaces, the gray smudge that returns even after cleaning, the darker streaks near tracks and vents, like the tunnel has been handling charcoal. This dust is not one thing. It is a mixture. Bits of iron-rich metal, mineral grit from the outside world, tracked in on shoes, fibers from clothing, skin flakes, tire particles from the streets above, drifting down through entrances. It is a blended sample of the city, ground, and sifted until it can float. And you, of course, breathe it. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that should panic you, just in the quiet way you breathe anywhere humans gather and move and shed. Your lungs are not fragile flowers. They are resilient, wet sponges designed to face a dirty world. Still, it is comforting, in a bleak little way, to know what the tunnel's air is made of, because a thing becomes less mysterious when you can name its ingredients. The tunnel's weather is also shaped by the seasons, though the seasons arrive down here like delayed mail. In winter, the surface air is cold and dense. When it enters the system, it sinks and flows differently. The tunnel holds onto warmth better than the street does, so it can feel like stepping into a shallow bath of air. In summer, warm air comes down the stairs and meets even warmer air below, and the system relies more heavily on fans and moving trains to keep it from becoming oppressive. Some stations feel surprisingly comfortable. Others feel like a polite warning from the future, a future where the heat never really leaves. Depth matters too. The deeper tunnels tend to have more stable temperatures. The shallow ones breathe more with the surface. If you want to imagine it simply, think of the subway like layers of clothing. The deeper you go, the more insulated it becomes. And the insulation works both ways, keeping heat in, keeping sudden cold out. All of this creates patterns. Not perfect patterns, not the kind that behave for scientists with clipboards, but patterns that are steady enough to predict. Air tends to flow along certain corridors again and again, guided by tunnel geometry, fan placement, station layout, and train frequency. It is a bit like a river system made of pressure and temperature. You cannot see the currents, but they have banks, they have channels, they have preferred routes, and where the air goes, other things go too. Not just dust, smells. The tunnel's smell is its own ecosystem announcement. You get a little ozone-like sharpness sometimes from electrical equipment and sparking contacts. You get oil and grease, not fresh like a workshop, but warmed and spread thin. You get the mineral scent of damp concrete, especially where water seeps in and evaporates slowly. You get a faint human layer too. Laundry detergent, perfume, sweat, shampoo, yesterday's garlic. Smell is chemistry, carried on the wind. And in the subway, chemistry has a very reliable delivery system. So when you stand in one station and catch a whiff of something from far down the tunnel, you are experiencing the airflow doing its job. It is taking a little packet of information from somewhere else and placing it in your nose in a strange way. That is ecological connectivity. Not the kind with birds migrating and salmon running upstream, but the kind where a tunnel links neighborhoods with air currents. And your body becomes the sensor. And as you walk along the platform, you begin to notice how the underground space shapes your attention. Your eyes slide toward the bright rectangles of advertisement panels. Your ears focus on footsteps, distant announcements, the metallic complaint of a train rounding a curve. Your skin registers the warmth near equipment rooms and the cooler drafts near certain stairwells. This is what it means to enter a habitat, not because you belong here necessarily, but because your senses adapt quickly to whatever rules the place is using. There is a quiet irony in it. Humans build subways to ignore nature, to bypass weather, to skip around rivers and hills, to move like we are separate from the planet's inconvenience. And yet, the moment you step down here, you enter a new kind of nature. A nature made of concrete, yes, but still ruled by temperature gradients, airflow, moisture, and food availability. The basic ingredients never stop being in charge. Even in places built for machines, life looks for edges, cracks, and crumbs. It looks for stability. It looks for warmth. It looks for the spots where humans are careless. You pass a wall with hairline cracks in the concrete. In daylight, you might not notice them. Down here, with artificial light and shadows, they look deeper than they are. Little canyons, little shelters. You pass a utility door with a gap beneath it. You pass the seam where tile meets concrete. You pass a drain that glistens faintly. Each of these is a microhabitat, a specific combination of darkness, airflow, moisture, and texture. If you could shrink yourself down to the size of a grain of rice, this place would feel enormous. A mountain range of gravel, a cliff of painted steel, a valley where dust accumulates. The subway is not one environment. It is many small environments stitched together, and the stitching is messy. Now, once you notice the tunnel has its own weather, you start to wonder what exactly is floating in that gentle, gritty breeze. Because the air down here is not empty. It is busy. Some of what you breathe is simply urban dust, the same kind that settles on your windowsill at home. But some of it is shaped by the specific mechanics of rail travel. The wheel-rail interface creates fine metallic particles. Iron-rich dust can become airborne, then settle along surfaces in streaks and films. In some systems, studies have found higher concentrations of these particles in subway air than at street level, especially on platforms where trains brake and accelerate. You do not need to memorize the details. Just picture it like this. Every time the train slows down, it is sanding itself. Not much, not visibly, but enough that over years, the tunnel becomes lightly coated in the evidence of motion. And the train does not do this in silence. When it arrives, it pushes a wall of air ahead of it. That air picks up whatever is loose: dust, lint, dry grit, the lightest debris. It becomes a brief storm front, an invisible tide that washes the platform. You can feel it as a soft pressure change in your face. The air presses and then releases, like the station is taking a slow breath in your direction. If you stand near the edge, the gust is stronger. If you stand back, it is gentler, but still there. The system is constantly mixing its own atmosphere. This is why the idea of subway air can feel unsettling, not because it is uniquely poisonous necessarily, but because it is unavoidably shared. It is a communal resource. Everyone contributes. Everyone inhales. A comforting thought if you enjoy existential intimacy, a less comforting thought if you prefer your molecules to remain loyal. But there is another side to it. The airflow patterns can actually be steady and predictable, especially in systems with designed ventilation. Engineers model how air moves through tunnels and stations. They look for dead zones where air stagnates. They design fans and vents to direct flow. They use the trains themselves as moving pumps. Sometimes they even take advantage of something called the stack effect, where warm air rises through shafts and stairwells like smoke in a chimney, pulling in cooler air from elsewhere. So the tunnel's weather is not entirely accidental. It is partly designed and partly improvised. Like most human systems, it is a compromise between ideal plans and whatever was cheaper at the time. Humidity plays a strange role here. You might expect underground spaces to be damp. Caves often are, basements often are, and many subway spaces do have wet corners, leaks, and condensation. But the air itself can feel dry, especially with heavy ventilation and the constant movement of trains. Dryness is not just about water presence. It is about how much moisture the air can hold at its temperature and how quickly air is exchanged. A station can be warm and dry in the open areas, then damp and cool in a side corridor, then warm and wet near a leaking pipe. It can change over a distance of a few steps. And those moisture differences matter because they decide what can live where. Dry surfaces accumulate dust and skin flakes, which become food for certain microbes. Damp surfaces support different microbial communities, and sometimes visible films of slime in neglected corners where water and nutrients collect. Insects, too, prefer certain humidity ranges. The tunnel is quietly sorting life into zones. If you watch long enough, you can see the boundary lines. In one area, the wall is clean enough to look pale. In another, it is stained darker, as if it has been brushed with smoke. In one area, the floor is always dry. In another, there is always a thin sheen, a persistent dampness that reflects light like a tired eye. Where does that water come from? Sometimes it is groundwater, seeping through cracks under pressure, carrying minerals along for the ride. Sometimes it is stormwater that has found an unintended path downward. Sometimes it is condensation when warm air meets a cooler surface and gives up its moisture. And sometimes it is the subway itself, washing systems, maintenance fluids, spilled drinks, the small, ordinary accidents of millions of trips. You walk past a grate where warm air blows upward, and you notice how it changes the feel of the station. That warm vent is not just comfort for waiting passengers. It is a heat island, a little zone where biological processes speed up. Microbes reproduce faster in warmer conditions. Up to a point, insects develop faster too. If you are a small creature looking for a stable life, warmth is a gift, as long as it does not come with too much disturbance. Disturbance is the tunnel's other constant. The subway is rarely still. Even late at night, something is humming. Even when no train is present, the rails hold the memory of vibration. The platform holds the rhythm of footsteps. The lights buzz faintly. The air moves. The place is always in use, even when humans are not actively using it. From an ecological perspective, this is a habitat with frequent, predictable disruptions, like a shoreline with tides, like a forest edge with wind, like a kitchen that gets cleaned every day, mostly. Some organisms love that kind of world. Specialists evolve for it. Others visit briefly and leave. The tunnel becomes a filter. So when you imagine the underground, do not imagine a sealed vault. Imagine a breathing, drafty space that is constantly exchanging air with the surface, exchanging passengers with the city, exchanging particles with every passing train. Which means, inevitably, the subway becomes a delivery service for heat, for smells, for the smallest travelers. You touch a railing as you walk. Maybe you do not even notice you touched it, because your hand is already thinking about balance, about timing, about the edge of the platform. But the moment your skin makes contact, you leave something behind. You shed cells constantly, tiny flakes of skin, too small to feel, sloughing off like quiet snowfall. They carry oils, they carry salts, they carry the microbial community that lives on you all the time, whether you are impressed by that fact or deeply offended by it. And you pick up something too, not in a dramatic disease movie way. Most of what you pick up is harmless. Most microbes are not interested in hurting you. They are interested in living. Skin is a habitat. Dust is a habitat. The subway pole is a habitat with very frequent human contact, which makes it a kind of microbial airport. Microbes are everywhere, because everywhere is to a microbe a reasonable place to be. Life is opportunistic. It does not wait for perfect conditions. It takes what it can get. So, the surfaces in the subway collect what scientists sometimes call a microbial fingerprint. It changes over time. It reflects the people who pass through, the materials of the station, the cleaning routines, the airflow, the humidity. If you swabbed a seat, then swabbed a turnstile, then swabbed the wall near the tracks, you would not find the same community on each. You would find patterns. Handles and poles tend to be rich in human-associated microbes, the kinds that enjoy skin and sweat. Floors carry more soil-associated organisms and street debris because shoes are excellent at transporting the outside world into places it was never invited. Walls can be quieter, but still collect airborne dust, and with it, whatever life is riding those particles. Areas near water, drains, and leaks become their own microbial neighborhoods, often with more diversity because water supports more metabolism. And here is the part people sometimes get wrong. Cleaning does not erase the ecosystem. It reshapes it. When cleaners wipe down surfaces, they remove a lot of material. They reduce microbial load, which is generally good for reducing the chance of pathogens spreading. But microbes return quickly because humans return and because microbes reproduce fast. So cleaning acts more like pruning a garden than deleting a file. It changes which organisms are most successful. It favors those that can recolonize quickly, or those that hide in tiny crevices and survive dry periods, or those that are tolerant of cleaning chemicals. Some bacteria can form biofilms, thin protective communities stuck to surfaces, making them harder to remove. Others survive desiccation by entering dormant states, waiting for moisture and nutrients to return. Some are simply replaced constantly by new arrivals, like travelers passing through a station that never closes. You can imagine it as a kind of slow, invisible tide. Human hands bring organisms in. Surfaces hold them briefly. Air currents redistribute them. Cleaning knocks them back. Then, the cycle begins again. If you are tempted to feel disgust, that is understandable. Humans are trained to treat the unseen as suspicious. But there is a calmer way to frame it. Your body is already an ecosystem. Your skin is already a landscape. You are not a sterile creature entering a dirty place. You are a moving habitat, touching other habitats. The subway is not contaminating you. You and the subway are exchanging citizenship papers, briefly, at the border. Of course, occasionally, harmful microbes can be present. That is true in any crowded public space. This is why hand washing matters, and why public health people lose sleep for a living. But most of the microbial world is not a villain. It is just persistent. It is also strangely specific. In some studies of urban transit systems, researchers have found that different stations can develop different microbial signatures, partly because of the neighborhoods they serve, the ventilation patterns, and the materials used. It is like each station has a faint biological accent. If you ride the line all day, you carry those accents with you. You become a messenger, a courier of tiny life forms that do not know they are traveling and do not care. That is the story of humans. Really, we move, and other things move with us. We build infrastructure, and it becomes habitat. We try to make the world clean and predictable, and the world responds by becoming complex in new ways. And once the invisible world feels real, it is easier to imagine the larger, more familiar creatures that also learn the subway's rhythms. You do not see them right now. Not usually. Not on a clean platform under bright lights with people nearby, but you know they are here because this place offers what any urban animal needs: shelter, warmth, food. The food comes from you, not directly. Most of the time, you are not being hunted for sport. It comes from crumbs, from dropped snacks, from overflowing bins, from the thin smear of spilled soda that dries sticky on the floor, from the half-eaten sandwich someone abandoned in a paper bag, with the casual cruelty of a species that does not understand scarcity. To a rat, this is not litter. It is opportunity. Rats are specialists in human environments, and they are very good at learning schedules. They notice patterns. They map safe routes. They memorize where food tends to appear. They also learn when danger is most likely. Rush hour is noisy, crowded, bright. It is full of large animals with shoes and rolling suitcases and unpredictable movements. It is not a pleasant time to be small. Quiet gaps are different. Late night is different. Early morning is different. The rat's day-night cycle is not the sun. It is the service timetable. There is a reason people sometimes glimpse a rat darting along the tracks just after a train leaves. The train's arrival and departure creates disturbance. Then a brief window of calm. The air changes. The platform empties slightly. The rat moves fast, hugging the edges, using shadows like cover. It is not evil. It is not dirty in the way people mean when they say dirty. It is an animal doing animal math. Calories in, risk out, and rats are not the only diners. Cockroaches, too, love the combination of warmth, moisture, and food residue. They prefer places where they can hide, where surfaces are close together, where there are cracks and gaps that make them feel protected. A subway system has endless versions of those spaces. Roaches are not interested in your fear. They are interested in the dark triangle behind a panel where condensation forms and dust collects, and a crumb can sit undisturbed for days. If you ever see one, it is usually because it miscalculated, or because the population in that area is large enough that some individuals take more risks, or because a nearby disturbance, like maintenance work, pushed it out of its usual hiding place. Humans tend to label these animals as symbols of filth, but that is mostly a story humans tell themselves to separate their own habits from the consequences of their habits. The roach did not invent the trash can. The rat did not invent the food court. These creatures are not moral failures. They are successful urban ecologists. They thrive because the subway is predictable. Predictability is a resource. A station where people eat every day is a feeding ground. A bin that overflows regularly is a buffet. A corner that stays warm all winter is shelter. A drain that stays damp is water. A crack behind a wall panel is a nesting site. The subway offers these things in small, scattered patches. It is not one big feast. It is a chain of tiny opportunities, and animals that live here become experts at moving between them. You can imagine them reading the subway the way you read signs, not with letters, but with scent trails, warmth gradients, airflow, and the faint vibrations of approaching footsteps. If you stand still long enough, you can sometimes feel those vibrations through the floor. The station trembles faintly as a train enters the tunnel, far away. That tremble is information. For you, it means your ride is coming. For a rat, it means a loud disturbance is about to arrive, and it is time to retreat. And if you are thinking right now that this all sounds like chaos, it is. But it is also order. It is an ecosystem built on human routine, which is, somehow, one of the crueler kinds of stability. And if a tunnel can feed a rat, it can also support quieter lives, tiny hunters, and scavengers that most people never think to look for. Because the rats and roaches are only the headline creatures, the ones humans notice and complain about and mythologize. But in the cracks and ledges, in the service corridors and utility rooms, there are smaller residents that live more discreetly. They do not need much. They do not want attention. They do not want your sandwich. They want the things that come after. The insects drawn to light. The tiny flies that breed near damp drains. The moths that wander in by accident. The beetles that find a corner with dust and organic debris. And where there are insects, there are predators. Spiders do well in places where prey comes regularly, and the structure offers anchoring points. A subway station is full of corners, beams, rails, cables, and vents. It is architecture that can be used as web scaffold. You might not see the webs easily because cleaning removes many, and because the air movement can damage them. But in quieter areas, behind signs, under stairs, near seldom open doors, webs can persist. They catch the tiny commuters, gnats, moths, little flying insects that drift in and fail to find their way back out. Light plays a strange role here. Platforms are bright islands in a darker system. Light spills into the tunnel mouth like water, then fades quickly into shadow. That creates a boundary zone where certain insects gather, attracted by the brightness. It is not because the light is good for them. It is because their navigation systems are confused by it. And predators learn this. A spider does not need to understand the physics of artificial illumination. It only needs to notice that food appears more often near the light. Over time, the spider's instincts and survival do the rest. Some insects arrive intentionally, following warmth and shelter. Many arrive by accident. You bring them on your clothes, on your bag, in the folds of a scarf. The wind brings them down stairwells. Deliveries bring them in cardboard boxes. Plants in station decor, if any exist, can carry hitchhikers too. Most of these accidental visitors die. The tunnel is not forgiving. It is dry in some places, too warm in others, too disturbed, too chemically strange. But a few find niches, and once a niche exists, life repeats. That is one of the quiet truths of ecology. It is not always about dramatic adaptation. Sometimes it is just about conditions staying the same long enough for a cycle to settle in. An insect lays eggs in a damp corner. The larvae find enough organic material to feed. They pupate somewhere sheltered. Adults emerge near a light source, find mates, repeat. If cleaning schedules and moisture patterns remain stable, that cycle can continue for years. It is not a thriving forest. It is a small, persistent loop. A subway tunnel can host these loops the way an old building hosts them. The difference is the vibration, the airflow, the constant mechanical breathing. Even so, you would be surprised how much stability can exist in a place that feels so busy. Because busy, for humans, often means predictable. The same trains at the same times, the same cleaning crews, the same lights turning on and off, the same doors opening and closing. From the perspective of a small creature, that is a dependable world. And when you start seeing the tunnel as a set of tiny habitats stitched together, the next question is, what shapes those habitats in the first place? It is not just food. It is not just light. It is water. Water is the quiet architect of underground spaces. It finds weaknesses. It exploits seams. It carries minerals and chemicals. It leaves stains like slow handwriting. In a perfect system, the subway would be dry. Engineers plan drainage. They seal walls. They pump water out. They design slopes so liquids flow toward drains. And then reality arrives, wearing a hard hat and holding a coffee. Groundwater presses against tunnel walls. Rainwater finds cracks. Old seals age. Concrete shifts microscopically with temperature and vibration. Pipes sweat. Condensation forms where warm air meets cool surfaces. So you get leaks. Sometimes they are dramatic, a steady trickle from an overhead seam, catching the light as it falls. Sometimes they are subtle, just a persistent damp patch that never quite dries. And where water appears, life follows. Not always visible life, often microbial life first, feeding on whatever nutrients are dissolved or deposited there. Water also changes the physical environment. It dissolves minerals and then leaves them behind when it evaporates, creating pale streaks and crusts on walls. In natural caves, this can form stalactites over long times. In tunnels, you get a fast-forwarded version, small mineral deposits that look like the beginning of cave decorations. But made in a world with trains, these deposits tell a story. They tell you that water has been moving through this spot repeatedly. They tell you the water carries dissolved minerals from the surrounding ground. They tell you evaporation is happening here, which means airflow is reaching this surface. And because air reaches it, spores reach it, dust reaches it, the smallest seeds of biology reach it. Now the damp patch becomes a microhabitat. Not comfortable for you, but for certain bacteria and fungi, it is a cozy little neighborhood. And in winter, when the outside world is cold, those damp, warm corners become even more valuable to small creatures. Warmth speeds up metabolism. Water enables life. The tunnel offers both in scattered pockets. You can picture the system as a map of comfort zones. A warm equipment room behind a locked door, a damp drain under a stairwell, a sheltered crack behind a panel, a light pool near the platform edge. Each zone has its own residence, its own rhythm, its own carrying capacity. Not huge, not glamorous, but real. And as you stand here, listening to the distant metallic sigh of the rails, you realize something slightly absurd. This entire underground ecosystem exists because humans want to get to work faster. You built a tunnel to shorten travel time, and in doing so, you created a linear cave with artificial seasons, predictable storms of air, and a continuous supply of crumbs. Congratulations! You accidentally became a landscape designer, and the tunnel does what landscapes always do. It fills with life. Not the life you planned, not the life you advertised on posters, but the life that fits the conditions. Speaking of water finding its way through everything, it also carries messages, chemical hints that tell you what the city is made of. Those hints are dissolved in the water like gossip in a crowded car. Quiet, constant, and impossible to fully contain. You are standing in a place that tastes faintly of stone, metal, and old effort. You just do not usually describe it that way. But chemistry does not care what you usually do. A leak on the wall is not just water, it is a sample. It has squeezed through soil and fractured rock, brushed past old concrete, and picked up whatever it can carry. Calcium, sulfates, chlorides, tiny ions with no personality except the one they give to everything they touch. When the water finally reaches the tunnel air, it starts to evaporate. The liquid leaves, the minerals stay. That is how you get those pale streaks down a wall, like the tunnel is slowly drooling chalk. If the deposit is mostly calcium carbonate, it is the same basic material as limestone, the same stuff that builds cave formations. It is just happening on the schedule of transit maintenance, not geology textbooks. You can often tell where the water is most persistent by the thickness of the crust. Thin dusting means occasional dampness. A thicker, rougher ridge means it has been leaking long enough to build its own little monument. Congratulations, the tunnel is growing decorations. The stain patterns also show you airflow. Where the air is moving faster, evaporation happens faster. That leaves sharper edges, more buildup. Where the air is still, the stain can spread wider, darker, and softer at the edges. So without realizing it, you are reading the tunnel's invisible weather map in mineral handwriting. Now, stone and concrete are not inert, even if they look calm. Concrete is a manufactured rock. It is made from cement, sand, gravel, and water, and it cures into something hard enough to hold up a city. But over time, it reacts with its environment. Water seeps in, and carbon dioxide from the air can dissolve into that water. That creates a weak acid, carbonic acid, the same gentle chemistry that helps shape natural caves. In concrete, it can slowly change the internal chemistry, lowering the alkalinity. That matters because the steel reinforcing bars inside concrete rely on that alkaline environment for protection. When the chemistry shifts, the steel can start to corrode. Rust expands. Expanding steel cracks concrete. Cracked concrete lets in more water. The cycle is not dramatic, It is patient. It is the kind of failure that shows up years later, like a long delayed reply. And if you ever wonder why maintenance crews are always patching, sealing, painting, drilling, this is why. The tunnel is not a finished object. It is a negotiation with water and time. You walk past a section of wall where the surface looks slightly blistered. Paint has lifted in places, like tired skin. That can happen when moisture comes from behind, pushing outward, carrying salts. When the water evaporates, salts crystallize, and the crystals take up space. It is called efflorescence when the salts appear on the surface. And it is called you having a bad time when it happens near anything important. This is the flavor of the tunnel, not just metaphorically. If you could taste the air deeply enough, you would notice hints of it. Mineral dust, metallic grit, a faint bite from electrical ozone near certain equipment, oil and grease, warmed by friction, smeared into a thin film that never fully leaves. Humans like to imagine infrastructure as clean lines and confident angles, but the subway is more like a stew. Materials leach into each other slowly. Dust settles, gets relifted, settles again. Water adds a little chemistry, then leaves. Heat speeds reactions, then fades. The whole system simmers always. Metal is especially chatty. Steel rails shed tiny particles as trains pass. Brake systems generate dust. Some of that dust is rich in iron, and iron oxidizes when it meets oxygen and moisture. Oxidation is just metal slowly falling apart in a very organized way. Rust is not just a color, it is a process. Electrons moving, atoms rearranging, the universe doing bookkeeping. If you stand near the tracks, you may notice that particular smell, the sharp, damp, coin-like scent. That is not your imagination. That is chemistry in your nose. Iron compounds, ozone traces, oily residues, all mixed into one signature that says, this place does work. And the materials age differently, which creates a patchwork. Tile stays smooth and easy to wipe until it cracks, then it becomes a shelter for grime. Concrete holds dust in its pores and holds heat in its mass. Rubber mats catch fibers and skin flakes. Painted steel resists for a while, then chips, and the chip edges become little starting points for corrosion. Every surface is a microclimate. A cold metal handrail condenses moisture from warm air during certain seasons, leaving a thin, invisible film that dries later. That brief wetness can be enough for microbes to wake up, feed, and divide before going dormant again. Life does not need a lake. Sometimes it only needs a damp breath. Oil and grease add another layer. Lubricants are essential for a system with moving parts, but they migrate. They spread under vibration. They collect dust. They make a paste. That paste sticks to walls near track level and becomes part of the tunnel's permanent complexion. If you ever see a dark band along the lower wall, it is not shadow. It is years of aerosolized mechanical life, condensed and glued down. And because the tunnel keeps exchanging air with the surface, it also keeps sampling the surface. Your shoes bring in soil. Not much at a time, but enough. Tiny grains of quartz, bits of plant matter, pollen, road salt in winter. Your clothes bring fibers and lint, which become food for certain fungi and insects that can digest keratin, cellulose, and whatever else humans casually shed. Even the things you do not notice, the little flakes of dead skin, become nutrition down here. Dust mites prefer homes with fabric and warmth, but other tiny scavengers can make use of human debris in more hidden corners. The tunnel is not alive the way a forest is alive. It is alive the way a pantry is alive if you never quite clean behind the shelves. And here is the odd part. The tunnel's chemistry is not just dirt. It is information. If you sample dust from different parts of a subway system, you can often find signatures of different materials and activities. More metal near braking zones, more silica dust near construction or certain rock types, more salts near entrances in winter, where road de-icing compounds get tracked down. In some cities, researchers have studied subway particulate matter and found that it differs from street air. The particles can be smaller, richer in iron, and shaped by friction processes. That does not automatically mean disaster, but it does mean the underground has its own atmosphere, with its own fingerprints. It is like the subway has a distinct accent, and it speaks through dust. Now, you might be thinking, why should you care about the taste of a tunnel? You are not licking the wall. Ideally, but chemistry is not only about taste, it is about what survives. A surface that is frequently dry, salty, and exposed to metal-rich dust will select for certain microbes. A damp wall with mineral seepage will select for others. An oily patch near track equipment might host organisms that can tolerate hydrocarbons, the kind that treat grease like lunch. This is not romantic life. It is practical life. The organisms that do well here are not delicate. They are generalists and survivors. Some form spores. Some cling to surfaces in biofilms. Some just keep arriving in such large numbers that a few always stick around. The tunnel's chemistry is a filter, quietly sorting the invisible population. And the filter changes as the system changes. When a station is renovated, new materials appear. Fresh concrete has different chemistry than old concrete. New paint off gases, different compounds. New airflow patterns emerge. New lighting changes insect behavior. Even new cleaning protocols can shift which microbes dominate. Ecology responds to what you build, whether you meant to build ecology or not. Now let your attention drift outward a little, because the tunnel is not sealed off from the world above. It is not a separate planet. It is more like the underside of the same organism. Everything on the surface leaks down here in slow motion. A gust of wind at street level pushes air down a stairwell. That air carries pollen grains, soot, tire dust, and whatever the city made that day. In spring, you might be dragging down a cloud of tree pollen without knowing it, sprinkling it into a place with no trees at all. Pollen is an interesting traveler. It is tough, designed to survive harsh conditions, and it carries proteins and lipids that can feed microbes. It settles into dust layers and becomes part of the tunnel's pantry. So the surface feeds the underground in crumbs and grains, not just the crumbs from your snack, but the biological crumbs from parks, street trees, rooftop gardens, and vacant lots. Soil is another gift. Every shoe is a sampling device. You walk through a bit of dirt near a curb, then you step into the station, and the dirt falls off later, ground finer by foot traffic. It ends up in corners, in track beds, in the seams of flooring. So the tunnel gets a little donation of earth millions of times. And water, of course, is the main courier. Storm water can enter through vents, grates, and the subtle failures that appear when infrastructure ages. In some systems, heavy rain overwhelms drainage, and you get the subway's least charming feature, sudden indoor rivers. But even without flooding, water trickles downward in small ways. It brings dissolved pollutants from the surface, road salts, nutrients, metals, sometimes traces of petroleum residues, not always in dangerous amounts, but enough to change the chemistry of damp spots and therefore change what life can make a living there. And then there is construction. If you want to watch an ecosystem get disturbed, do not look for a forest fire. Look for a maintenance crew. A repair project scrapes away biofilms, removes dust layers, seals cracks, replaces panels. It destroys habitats and creates new ones in the same afternoon. For small organisms, that is apocalypse followed by opportunity. A sealed crack removes a shelter. A fresh wall is clean, but it will collect dust again. A changed airflow pattern might dry one corner and dampen another. So the community shifts. Life does not stop. It relocates. If you could watch at the scale of microbes and insects, the subway would look less like a fixed structure and more like a landscape that is constantly being re-terraformed by humans with mops and drills. And humans themselves are the most consistent link between surface and underground. You bring in plant fragments stuck to your clothes. You bring in outdoor fungi spores on your hair. You bring in bacteria from your home, your workplace, your pet. The tunnel receives all of it, like a mailbox that never closes. Then you take things back out again, not just microbes, seeds. It sounds dramatic, but it is mundane. Tiny seeds can cling to fabric. They can hide in mud, on a shoe tread. They can ride in the folds of a bag. Most will not germinate underground. There is not enough light, not enough suitable soil, too much disturbance. But some might make it as far as an entrance planter, a crack near a vent where light reaches, or the edge of a stairwell where damp soil collects. You would not call that a forest. But it is still dispersal. It is still ecology, using your commute as a delivery route. And because the subway connects neighborhoods, it acts like a conveyor belt. It mixes the city. Above ground, some urban animals hesitate to cross wide roads or open plazas. Below ground, the barriers are different. A tunnel is continuous shelter. If you can tolerate the vibration and the occasional screaming wind of a passing train. So, certain creatures use the system as a corridor. Rats, obviously, move through it. They can travel along track beds, through service passages, through maintenance routes that humans rarely think about. But they are not the only ones. Some insects spread along lines, especially those that prefer warm, sheltered structures. Certain cockroach species, for example, can become established in interconnected buildings and transit infrastructure, moving through utility chases and corridors like they own the place. Spiders can hitch rides too, not by intention, but by being carried on equipment, boxes, and sometimes even on people. Small flies and moths can be transported by the airflow itself, pulled along by the piston effect of trains. Stations become islands, each with its own conditions. Some are deep and warm. Some are shallow and drafty. Some are newer, with brighter lights and smoother materials. Some are older, with more cracks, more water, more complexity. The tunnels between them are like undersea cables, dark corridors connecting habitats. You can picture it like a chain of caves linked by windy passageways that periodically thunder. For a small creature, traveling through that passageway is risky. The wind can be violent. The vibration can be disorienting. The ground can be littered with hazards. But the reward is a new island with new food sources. And humans, without ever trying, help organisms make these trips. A beetle in a cardboard box delivered to a station kiosk. An ant colony fragment in potted plants used for decoration. A moth egg cluster on fabric that rode from one burrow to another. A microbial smear on a handrail that gets touched by 1,000 hands, then carried to a different line. You are an accidental ferry captain. The most relentless migrants are the invisible ones, because they do not have to survive as individuals. Microbes travel as populations. A few die, a few live, and the story continues. They can colonize surfaces, then be dislodged. Then it is constant, low-level movement, like dust in a sunbeam. Now, the surface does not only feed the underground with biological material, it also feeds it with energy patterns. The schedule of trains determines temperature cycles. The rush hour heat load is different from the late night lull. The opening and closing of station doors changes airflow. The presence of crowds adds humidity and warmth. Even if the tunnel never sees sunlight, it still has a day and night rhythm. It is just a human-made one. During the busiest parts of the day, the station warms slightly from body heat and train frequency. Carbon dioxide levels can rise with crowding, then fall later as ventilation clears the air. Moisture from breathing accumulates, then dissipates. For microbes and insects, those changes are the equivalent of weather. A little warmer, a little wetter, a little more food debris on the floor after rush hour, a little quieter later for scavenging. A rat does not care if it is Tuesday. It cares if the humans are present. It cares if the lights are bright. It cares if the ground is vibrating with danger. And this is where the tunnel becomes strangely like a role-playing map with zones, hazards, and safe rooms. There are the bright platform islands, high disturbance, high food input, high risk. There are the darker service corridors, lower disturbance, lower food, higher safety. There are the utility rooms, warm and stable, often locked away, the equivalent of treasure rooms for any creature that values heat. There are the drains, damp and nutrient-rich, like small swamps. There are the track beds, harsh and dusty, exposed to wind blasts and metal grit. And there are the boundary zones, the entrances, where surface air and underground air mix, where pollen falls, where temperatures fluctuate, where the ecology is constantly changing. If you were an insect, you would choose carefully. If you were a fungus spore, you would simply land where you land and hope. Now, speaking of corridors and islands, consider what the rails themselves mean, not just as steel paths for trains, but as linear features that slice through the underground environment. A track bed is like a riverbed, but instead of water, it carries trains and wind. When a train passes, the air moves hard enough to pick up loose particles. It pushes debris along. It can even move small insects, whether they want to move or not. So the tunnels become channels of transport, not only for people, but for anything light enough to be swept along. Some organisms exploit that. Others avoid it. A spider web too close to the tunnel mouth might get shredded by repeated gusts. So spiders choose calmer corners. Insects that fly toward light might drift into these gust zones and get carried down the line like accidental plankton. And because stations repeat similar structures, lights, ledges, signage, stairwells, organisms can find familiar niches again and again, like finding the same coffee shop layout in every airport. It is not that the subway is friendly. It is that the subway is consistent. Consistency is what life really wants. Now let the scene shift slightly. It is later. The trains are less frequent. The crowd thins. The station feels larger when it is emptier, like a room after guests leave. The sound changes first. Fewer voices means you can hear the infrastructure more clearly. The ventilation hum becomes the main note. Drips become audible in the distance, each one a tiny metronome marking time. Somewhere down the tunnel, a maintenance door closes with a heavy clank. The sound travels, bounces, returns. This is the night shift world. The subway after it stops pretending to be polite. Cleaning crews appear, and their work is less like housekeeping and more like ecological disturbance. They spray, wipe, sweep, pressure wash in some systems. They remove food residues, but also remove scent trails. They disrupt insect hiding places. They scatter dust layers that were stable. For a rat, this can be either inconvenience or opportunity. Cleaning can flush out hidden crumbs. It can also bring humans into quieter spaces, increasing risk. For cockroaches, a chemical treatment can be a population crash, followed by recolonization from nearby pockets that were missed. Roaches are good at surviving because they do not rely on one perfect hiding place. They rely on many. And for microbes, cleaning is selective pressure. The ones that resist drying and chemicals persist better. The ones that recolonize quickly return first. So the night does not reset the system to zero. It resets it to a different equilibrium. Maintenance work does something similar, but louder. Grinding rails produces fresh metal dust. Replacing old wood ties in some systems changes the microbial habitat. Welding adds heat and fumes. New sealant changes the chemical environment of cracks. Every repair is a small act of ecosystem engineering, and the system responds quietly, efficiently. Now, if you stay with this thought long enough, you start to see the subway as a kind of living diagram of the city itself. The surface city is messy and diverse, full of plants, pets, pests, humans, weather, and sunlight. The underground city is the distilled version, a filtered, pressurized ecosystem built on human movement. But they are not separate. When a storm hits the surface, the underground often feels it later as increased dampness, more seepage, heavier air. When pollen season peaks, the underground receives its share. When a neighborhood changes its food culture, the underground receives different crumbs. Even the cultural habits of commuters can matter. A station near a stadium after a game will have a different food debris pattern than a station near an office district after lunch hour. Ecology is not only about plants and animals. It is about resource flows, and the subway is a resource flow machine. Now imagine you are not you anymore. Imagine you are a small thing, not a rat, too obvious. Something smaller, quieter. You are a single grain of pollen, clinging to a jacket sleeve. You rode down the stairs and fell off in the draft. You land on the platform tile, in a corner where people rarely step. At first, nothing happens. You are dry. You are Then humidity rises slightly as a crowd arrives. Warm breath fogs the micro air above the tile. Moisture condenses faintly in the grout line. A microbe wakes up nearby, a bacterium that has been waiting for water like a bored commuter waiting for a delayed train. It reaches you, chemically speaking. It does not have arms. It has enzymes. It secretes molecules that break down organic material, turning your tough pollen shell into accessible food. The bacterium divides. 2 become 4. 4 become 8. A tiny, invisible feast begins right there on the tile. Later, a cleaning pass removes some of the dust and the growing colony. But not all. A few cells remain in the pore of the grout. They dry out, slow down, wait. Then another day, another humid moment, another opportunity. This is what life does in a tunnel. It pulses. Now, imagine you are a silverfish, the little insect that looks like a moving comma. You prefer damp, dark places. You eat starchy materials, paper fibers, sometimes skin flakes, sometimes the glue in book bindings if you get the chance. A subway is not your dream home, but there are corners. There are storage rooms. There are neglected stairwell gaps. There are cardboard scraps from deliveries. You move along the edge where wall meets floor because edges feel safer. You avoid open tile spaces under bright lights. You pause near a drain where the air is cooler and wetter. You taste the air with your antennae. You find a film of organic residue, barely there, but enough. You eat, you hide, you survive. No one applauds, no one notices. The system continues. Now zoom back out to you as you are, a human, standing in a tunnel world that is quietly full. You can feel the harshness of it if you focus, the abrasion of dust, the dryness in your throat sometimes, the way your skin feels slightly grimier after a long ride. But you can also feel the strange stability, the predictability, the engineered rhythm, and that rhythm shapes behavior. Nocturnal animals become bolder when the lights dim and footsteps vanish. The tunnel's day is your day, and its night is your night, but shifted, exaggerated, and controlled by schedules. Some subway systems run all night, and in those, the ecology adapts differently. Disturbance never fully stops. The quiet windows are shorter. The deep night is more myth than reality. In systems that close for a few hours, the ecology gets a true lull. That lull is when scavengers move more freely. It is when maintenance happens. It is when the tunnel exhales, and you can tell because the sound becomes simpler. Fewer voices, fewer doors, fewer announcements, just the fan hum, the drip echo, the occasional distant clatter that reminds you the tunnel is still working, still alive with machines. Somewhere, a rat tests a path it would not dare in daylight. Somewhere, a cockroach crosses a seam between tiles, its legs tapping too softly for you to hear. Somewhere, microbes on a handrail dry out and wait for the next warm hand. The tunnel does not sleep. It only changes shifts, and as you hold that image, you start to realize there is another kind of movement happening. Slower than trains, quieter than rats, a gradual migration of dust and debris. Every gust from a passing train pushes loose material a little further down the line. Every footstep kicks up fibers. Every maintenance sweep piles debris into new corners. Over months, certain spots become consistent collectors. Dust traps, shaped by airflow eddies and architectural quirks. Those dust traps are like compost heaps in miniature. They gather food for microbes and tiny scavengers. They can even influence air quality locally because disturbed dust becomes airborne again. So the tunnel has circulation not just of air, but of matter. Air moves, dust moves, water moves, heat moves, life moves. The subway is a machine for moving things, and it does not discriminate. If you want a final, quiet detail to hold on to as this part of the journey continues, notice how the station is full of lines. The rails, the cables, the platform edge markings, the tile seams. Lines guide humans. Lines also guide small creatures. Rats run along walls because walls provide cover. Insects follow edges because edges are navigational. Microbes spread along moisture films that form in seams because seams hold water longer. The built environment creates pathways at every scale. So even in a place designed for speed and efficiency, the slow, soft processes of ecology still find their roots. And somewhere in that slow routing between one station and the next, the underground keeps borrowing from the surface, and the surface keeps unknowingly feeding what it pretends is separate. And you feel that borrowing most clearly at the entrances, those awkward, windy mouths where the city swallows you. You stand near the top of the stairs for a moment, and the air has layers. The surface layer smells like rain on asphalt and warm bread from a corner shop. The underground layer smells like iron filings and old detergent and electricity pretending to be innocent. You think the boundary is a line. Street ends, subway begins. Wrong. The boundary is a gradient, like a shoreline. Things drift back and forth all day without anyone signing paperwork. A gust comes down the stairwell, and you can almost hear it carrying inventory. Pollen, soot, tire dust, lint, skin flakes, a few unlucky gnats. Then a train arrives, and the piston wind pushes a different inventory upward. Warmth, brake dust, that dry mineral smell, a faint oily note that will cling to your jacket and travel back to your apartment like a souvenir you did not buy. This is how the surface city feeds the underground, and how the underground quietly exports itself back into daylight. It is not dramatic. It is constant. It is the kind of exchange that makes ecologists smile, because it proves a point. Nothing is isolated. Everything leaks. Speaking of leakage, consider the most reliable delivery method humans have ever invented: your shoes. You are walking data. Your soles are rubber stamp pads for the city. Each step outside picks up a thin smear of whatever the neighborhood is made of. A few grains of soil from a street tree planter, a dusting of construction grit, a trace of fertilizer from someone's balcony garden, a little road salt in winter, the crunchy white stuff that turns sidewalks into mild chemical experiments. Then you bring it down here and you grind it in. The platform floor is not just a floor, it is a mixing bowl. Foot traffic pulverizes debris into smaller particles, and smaller particles travel more easily. They get into cracks. They ride drafts. They settle where airflow slows. And when you stop to wait, you are often standing above your own contribution, powdered into something that looks like nothing. The tunnel becomes a sampler of the surface, and the sample is constantly refreshed, which means the underground ecology is always getting new ingredients. Even if the recipes are limited, you might not think of pollen as food, but down here, it can be. Pollen grains are tough little capsules built to survive sun and drying wind. Some microbes can break them down slowly and treat them like small packets of carbon and nitrogen. So you can bring springtime into a place with no spring. You can bring a park into a corridor of concrete, and the underground accepts the gift with the enthusiasm of a creature that never gets to photosynthesize. If you follow the flow of surface debris deeper into the system, you start to notice a pattern. The gifts arrive in pulses. Morning rush delivers one kind of input: coffee droplets, breakfast crumbs. The occasional granola bar tragedy crushed into the tile grout. Midday delivers a different pattern: fewer bodies, different foods, different fabric fibers. Evening brings its own chemistry: takeout containers, sweet drinks, the slow fatigue smell of commuters, which is just sweat and fabric and human heat, stirred together like a tired soup. And late night is when the delivery stops, but the processing begins, because the underground is not just receiving, it is digesting. Not in a cute way, in a microbial way, in a scavenger way, in a you dropped it, so something will eat it way. Now, add stormwater to this picture, because water is the city's gossip network. On the surface, rain picks up whatever is loose and soluble. It touches tire residues, brake dust from cars, oil drips, bits of trash. It dissolves salts. It collects fine particles like a wet vacuum. Then the water looks for the lowest point, and the lowest point is often down here. Subway systems are engineered for drainage because nobody wants an underground aquarium. But drainage is never perfect, and the city above is never polite. So water comes in through grates and vents. It finds cracks where old seals have softened. It seeps along utility conduits. It follows gravity with religious devotion. When it arrives, it brings a chemical signature of the surface neighborhood. In winter, it may bring more chloride from road salt. Near industrial areas, it may carry different metals. Near parks, it may carry more organic material. You cannot smell most of that directly, but the life in damp spots can, in its own biochemical language, the microbial community shifts with the recipe of the water. So, in a strange way, the subway can have regional flavors, not like wine, more like wet concrete with notes of whatever humans were doing up there. You are tempted to call that disgusting, and it is, mildly. But it is also just the planet doing what it does, which is move molecules downhill and let organisms argue over them. Now, the city does not only feed the underground by accident, sometimes it feeds it on purpose and calls it maintenance. Think about the little landscaped planters near some station entrances. Small trees in boxes, decorative shrubs, a brave patch of ornamental grass clinging to life beside a sign that says, "Do not run." Those plants have soil. That soil has mites, nematodes, fungi, bacteria, and tiny insects. The entrance is a biological border crossing, and the guards are asleep. A few of those organisms drift inward with dust and wind. Most die Some persist near the entrance, where light and humidity are less harsh. You can sometimes see it if you look closely at the edges of stairwells. A faint green film, algae or moss, trying its luck where light reaches for a few hours a day. A tiny sprout in a crack fed by moisture and a few grains of soil. Congratulations! The subway has a garden. It is not intentional and it is not beautiful, but it is stubborn. And stubbornness is frankly the most reliable trait in biology. Now let the scene shift a little farther along the outline of this underground life, because the subway is not just passively receiving things, it is actively mixing them. It is a conveyor belt made of steel and schedules. You step onto a train and it is full of commuters, but you are also riding with a cloud of invisible cargo. Every passenger carries a personal dust halo. It is not large, it is not cinematic. It is just the small particles shaken loose from clothing fibers, hair, skin, and whatever you brushed against earlier. As the train moves, air circulates inside the car, doors open and close, exchanging air with stations. People shift, stand, sit, and relaunch dust like tiny rockets. Microbes hitchhike on all of it. So the train is not merely moving bodies through space. It is blending microbial communities across neighborhoods like a spoon stirring a pot. If you could see the microbial mixing the way you see colored dye in water, the car would look alive with currents. A smear from a handrail in one station becomes a potential colonist in another station. A skin bacterium from your palm lands on a seat, then transfers to a jacket, then to a different line. Most of these transfers are biologically boring, harmless organisms trading real estate. But as ecology, it is fascinating because movement creates connectivity, and connectivity changes who survives. Imagine stations as islands, because that metaphor actually works down here. Each station has its own conditions. Different depth, different temperature, different ventilation, different cleaning routine, different crowd density, different materials. An island with lots of touch surfaces and high passenger turnover is like a bustling port. An island with damp corners and older infrastructure is like a swampy coastline. An island with bright lights and dry air is a harsh desert with a busy airport. Now the tunnels between stations are the ocean, dark, windy, frequently disturbed. For many small organisms, the tunnel is not home. It is transit. It is exposure. It is risk. So successful migrants are either protected, like microbes inside dust particles, or they are tough, like roaches tucked into equipment crevices, or they are simply lucky. Humans, of course, are the ships. You think you are commuting, but you are also providing transport services to anything that can cling, hide, or survive in your wake. Congratulations on your new side job. And this connectivity matters over time because it can make the subway system feel like one long, continuous habitat to the right kind of creature. Rats can travel along track beds and service corridors, using the line like a highway with occasional thunder. Roaches can spread through interconnected utility spaces and stations, especially where warmth and moisture are consistent. Some insects do not even need to walk. They ride the wind. When a train passes through a tunnel, it pushes a pressure wave ahead. That wave can pick up tiny particles and very small insects and move them farther than they would ever choose to travel. So even if an organism does not have a plan, the infrastructure does. It moves things. Now, If you are trying to picture this gently, imagine a feather on a floor. If you open and close a door in a small room, the feather skitters. Not because it wants to, because airflow is force, and light things obey force. A moth that drifts too close to the tunnel mouth can be swept along. A small fly can get pulled into the moving air, then dumped in the next station like unwanted mail. This is one reason you sometimes see odd little insects underground that do not seem built for it. They did not move in. They got displaced. The subway is full of displaced life. Not just insects, seeds too, as we said. And spores. Fungal spores are everywhere in the surface air. They are built to travel, to endure dryness, to wait. They settle in dust. They stick to damp patches and wake when conditions allow. So the subway is seeded continuously with fungi from above. Most remain dormant or die. But in damp, neglected corners, fungi can form visible growth. Sometimes a dark smudge or a pale fuzzy patch in places nobody looks. Not all fungi are the same, of course. Some are harmless decomposers. Some can trigger allergies. A few can cause problems for immunocompromised people. The point is not fear. The point is reality, damp, dark infrastructure is a place where biology will try. And as the system migrates life around, it also migrates something else. Heat. Heat is the currency of the underground. Above ground, heat escapes to the sky. It radiates, it convects, it gets blown away. Down here, heat is trapped by concrete and soil, and it moves slowly. Every passing train adds warmth through braking and friction. Every transformer adds heat like a quiet radiator. Every crowd adds a small human layer. So a subway system develops thermal corridors. Some stretches are consistently warmer, especially near busy lines, equipment-dense zones, and deep tunnels with less exchange to surface air. Those warm zones become winter refuges. For rats, warmth means less energy spent maintaining body temperature. For insects, warmth can mean faster development and more reproduction, up to a point. For microbes, warmth can mean faster growth during brief wet moments. So the system does not just connect organisms spatially, it connects them energetically. It provides pockets where life can persist through seasons that would otherwise limit it. This is why some urban pests thrive year-round. The subway is their heated basement running under the entire city. Now, you might be thinking, surely the disturbance would make it impossible. Trains, vibration, noise, light. But disturbance does not always kill an ecosystem. Sometimes it selects for an ecosystem that expects disturbance. Ecologists talk about disturbance regimes, meaning the pattern of disruption over time. In a forest, that might be fire. In a river, that might be floods. In a subway, the disturbance regime is trains, cleaning, and maintenance. The key detail is that it is not random. It is rhythmic. Trains come at intervals, lights follow schedules, cleaning happens nightly or weekly or whatever the budget allows. So organisms that can hide during disturbance and exploit the quiet windows can do well. You see it with rats. You see it with the small scavengers that emerge when people leave. And you see it with microbes, which do not hide so much as endure. They dry out, then rehydrate. They get wiped away, then recolonize. Now, There is a quieter form of migration that is easy to miss: the movement of nutrients along the line. A busy station gets more food debris. Some of that debris gets swept into track beds. Some gets washed into drains. Water carries dissolved organic matter along pipes. Air currents carry dust and lint deeper into tunnels. So resources do not stay where they are dropped. They drift. This matters because it means even less busy sections can get a trickle of food, enough to support small communities in hidden niches. It is not abundant, but it is not zero. And life is excellent at surviving on not quite zero. Now, let's make this personal again, because the series style demands you become the thing. You are not a commuter now. You are a small brown cockroach, flattened and armored, designed like a living wallet. Your legs have spines that grip rough surfaces. Your antennae wave constantly, tasting the air for food and danger. Your world is the seam behind a vending machine panel. It is warm here. It is damp here, because the machine sweats cold sometimes, and condensation collects. There's a steady dusting of sugar crystals that fell during refills and dried. You do not need a feast. You need a smear. You wait through the day because the vibrations are constant. Footsteps above, machines humming, the occasional slam of a service door, the bright light that leaks around the panel edge. You prefer darkness, not because you are evil, because darkness means fewer predators and fewer human shoes. Then the station quiets. This is your opening. You move fast, hugging edges, because open space feels like a killing field. You find a sticky patch near a bin where soda dried and dust adhered. To you, this is a banquet table set with syrup and minerals. You feed quickly. You do not linger. You know the schedule. Even if you do not know you know it, disturbance will return like a tide. In the distance, you feel a low vibration, a train, far off. The air pressure shifts slightly. You retreat to your seam. This is your life, not glamorous, but stable. And stable is what evolution tends to reward. Now you are something even smaller. You are a bacterium on a pole. You live in a thin film of skin oil, mixed with salts. It is not much, but it is enough. A hand grabs the pole, the warmth spikes. Moisture appears briefly. New nutrients arrive. You are pressed, squeezed, transferred. Some of your population moves to the hand, then to a phone screen, then to a face. Some of your population stays. Some dies when the pole dries again. But you reproduce fast. You do not need a long life. You need a quick copy. And this is why the subway's invisible passengers are so persistent. The environment is harsh, but the traffic is constant. Now zoom back out and notice how the subway is connected to the surface in another way: repairs and renovations. A construction project is not just loud for humans. It is a habitat earthquake. When workers open walls, they expose cavities that have been sealed for years. Dust that settled quietly gets thrown into the air. Old moisture patterns change when ventilation is rerouted. New materials arrive, smooth and clean and chemically fresh. Fresh concrete is alkaline. New sealants off-gas compounds. New paint changes surface chemistry and texture. For microbes, that is a new continent. For insects, that is a new layout of hiding places. Sometimes, construction reduces pest problems by sealing entry points and removing old debris. Sometimes it creates new problems by moving pests into adjacent areas or by creating warm, sheltered voids behind new panels. So maintenance is not purely cleaning, it is reshaping. Humans often talk about the subway as if it is a fixed object, but it is more like a living building site, always being adjusted, and the ecology adjusts with it. Now, since we are meandering in a calm way, let's talk about one of the strangest surface to underground gifts: human behavior patterns. Different neighborhoods feed the subway differently. A station near a cluster of schools has different rhythms, different food debris, different touch patterns, more sticky candy residue perhaps, more hand contact on lower railings. A station near nightlife has late bursts of passengers, spilled drinks, and more irregular hours. A station near offices has sharp rush hours and a different scent profile, more coffee and cologne and pressed fabric. This is not moral judgment. This is resource mapping. The subway is a mirror of the city, and the mirror collects dust. So if you sampled the microbial community on surfaces in different stations, you might find differences that reflect these patterns. More skin-associated microbes in high contact zones, more soil-associated microbes near entrances that open directly to parks, more moisture-loving organisms in older, leakier sections. The details vary by city, by climate, by system design, but the principle holds. The surface writes its story downstairs, and the downstairs world replies by sending some of its story back up on your clothes. Now, speaking of movement, let's follow the tracks themselves, because tracks are more than steel. They are corridors. You step down from the platform in your mind into the track bed. Not recommended in real life unless you enjoy being corrected by electricity and physics. Down here, the air is different. It is darker, heavier with dust. The smell of metal is stronger. The sound is deeper because the tunnel amplifies low frequencies. The track bed is harsh habitat. There is vibration. There is wind. There is occasional water in the drainage channels. There is debris that falls from platforms, but it is also a highway for animals that know the timing. A rat can run along the side, staying close to the wall. It can use cross passages and recesses. It can retreat into service spaces. The rat does not need to outrun a train. It needs to avoid being present when a train arrives. It needs to read vibration and sound, and rats are very good at that. They learn the sound of an approaching train as a pattern, not a panic. They learn the safe pockets. They learn where they can climb up, where they can slip through. They also learn where humans do not go. If you have ever seen a rat on the platform, that is often a sign it was forced into the open, a disturbance, a chase, a miscalculation, or simply hunger outweighing caution. Down in the track bed, away from the eyes, they can travel. So the subway is a connectivity network for rats, linking neighborhoods beneath the streets. This is part of why controlling rodents is so difficult in cities. You can remove food from one place, and they can move along the network to another, and they do not move alone. Roaches can spread similarly, though their movement is slower and more dependent on sheltered routes. Certain roaches prefer warm, humid utility corridors and can persist in the cracks and voids of station infrastructure. Even ants can use subway structures sometimes, especially near entrances where food is present and temperature is stable. Ants are less common deep in tunnels, but near stations where crumbs fall and heat leaks, they can form trails. And then there are the accidental travelers, the ones that do not intend to migrate but end up doing it. A spider egg sac tucked into a maintenance cart, a beetle in a delivered package, a fly larva in moist trash that gets moved. Humans move objects constantly through the system. Tools, bins, signage, supplies, replacement parts. Each object can carry hitchhikers, so the subway is also a freight network for biology. Now let's slow down and focus on the station island again, because islands have edges, and edges are where things happen. The platform edge is a dangerous line. For humans, it is where you are told to stand back. For small creatures, it is where airflow is strongest when trains arrive. That airflow does two ecological jobs at once. It brings oxygen and carries away heat, and it also acts like a broom, lifting dust and redistributing it. The result is that areas near the edge may be swept more often. In an aerodynamic sense, dust might not accumulate as thickly there compared to sheltered corners behind staircases or beneath benches. So the most productive microhabitats for microbes and tiny scavengers are often not the obvious ones. They are the quiet corners, the undersides, the gaps behind signage, the seams where cleaners cannot reach easily. And those places are also where you find the slow accumulation of organic debris, the kind that becomes food. In ecology, you call that detritus, dead organic matter. In subway language, you call it gross stuff in corners, but the function is the same. Detritus feeds decomposers. Decomposers feed the next level. A little pile of lint mixed with skin flakes is, to a fungus, a buffet. A fungus colony is to a tiny mite, a grazing field. Mites can be food for small, predatory arthropods. These are small loops, quiet loops, but they are real. So the subway has food webs, just scaled down and squeezed into corners. Now, if you want a delayed payout, here is one. Why do some stations feel stuffier than others, even on the same line? You might assume it is just your mood, or the crowd, or the fact that you are trapped underground with your thoughts. All true in their own ways. But physically, it often comes down to ventilation design and piston effect. Stations differ in how air can move in and out. Some have better connections to the surface through vents and shafts. Some are deeper and more enclosed. Some have platform screen doors, which can change airflow patterns significantly, reducing the tunnel piston blast into the station. In older systems, ventilation may be patchy, with areas where air exchange is less efficient. In those zones, heat and humidity build up, especially during rush hours. That changes comfort for humans, and it also changes habitat quality for organisms. A warmer, more humid station can support different microbial growth patterns, and it can be more attractive to insects that like moisture. A drier station may have less visible microbial film, but more airborne dust. So the same line can feel like different climates, station to station. Now imagine the subway system as a map of microclimates, each station a node, each tunnel a corridor. Airflow as the invisible river connecting them. this is not just poetic. Engineers model it. They use computational fluid dynamics, which is a fancy phrase meaning they ask a computer to predict how air will behave in complicated spaces. They care because heat needs to be removed, smoke needs to be managed in emergencies, and air quality affects health. Ecologists care because airflow is also dispersal. And you, standing there, care because the station either feels breathable or it feels like a basement argument. Now, there is another, less discussed part of subway ecology: the chemistry of cleaning. Cleaning products leave residues. Disinfectants kill many microbes, but not all. Some organisms are more resistant. Some hide in pores and crevices. Some recolonize quickly. Repeated cleaning can select for microbes that tolerate drying and chemical exposure. It is not that the subway is breeding supervillains. It is that the environment favors certain traits, like any environment does. At the same time, cleaning reduces the presence of pathogens and reduces organic material that would feed pests. So, cleaning is, overall, a beneficial disturbance for public health. But ecologically, it is still disturbance. It is a reset button that never fully resets. And that means subway ecology is always in motion, even when the walls look still. Now, let's pivot gently into the idea of tracks as pathways again, because pathways are not only for pests, they are for microbes too, in a way that is almost funny. Microbes do not walk down tunnels, but they do ride on dust, on hands, on tools, on water. If you take swabs from different parts of a transit system, you often find a mix of human skin bacteria, soil bacteria, and environmental microbes. The exact mix depends on location. High-touch surfaces have more skin-associated microbes. Floors have more soil and street-associated organisms. Damp drains have more moisture-loving communities. So, the subway is a mosaic, and movement across the system tends to homogenize that mosaic a little, blending microbial communities, especially on surfaces that are frequently touched by travelers. That is why trains, in particular, can have their own microbial signature, a blend of everyone. Again, not inherently scary, just intimate. Now, you are going to notice something else if you keep your attention on movement. Stations act like islands. Yes, but some islands are more connected than others. Transfer stations, where multiple lines intersect, act like hubs. More passengers, more mixing, more airflow complexity, more food debris. So a transfer station can be a hot spot for ecological exchange. Microbes from different lines, different neighborhoods, different surface environments, all meeting and blending. If you wanted to study urban microbial biogeography, meaning the distribution of microbes across a city, the subway would be a very efficient place to sample. And people have done this. Researchers have swabbed systems in cities like New York and found that most microbes are common, human-associated, and environmental. They also found that microbial communities can reflect local environments, not because the microbes have a civic identity, but because they arrive with humans and dust. And conditions select what persists. So the subway is both a mixer and a filter. Now, let's add a darker, but still calm reality check. The subway is also a place where things die. Insects fall onto tracks and desiccate. Small rodents sometimes get struck or trapped. Even microbial populations boom and crash with cleaning and dryness. Death is part of nutrient flow. Decomposition happens, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, depending on moisture and temperature. In dry sections, organic material can persist longer, becoming part of the dust layer. In damp sections, decomposition is faster, and you can get biofilms and slimy residues. So the underground has different decay speeds, like different time zones. And those time zones affect which scavengers can survive. Now, if you are still with me, let's drift forward in time within the subway day, because the outline wants us approaching the night shift more fully. Service slows, trains come less often. The platform lighting feels harsher when there are fewer people to soften it with movement. And in that quieter world, the ecological roles become clearer. During peak hours, humans dominate the habitat. You are loud, bright, disruptive, constantly shedding and dropping. During late hours, the scavengers take over. Rats become bolder. Roaches forage more openly. Small flies hover near drains. Spiders sit patiently in their webs, which are now more likely to remain intact without constant air blasts from frequent trains. And then the maintenance crews arrive, and they become the apex disturbers. You hear the scrape of brooms, the clatter of carts, the hiss of sprayed water. You see reflective vests moving slowly, methodically, like a ritual performed every night to keep the underworld from becoming too honest. Maintenance is ecology management, whether anyone calls it that or not. Trash removal reduces food supply. Pressure washing can remove biofilms. Sealing cracks reduces shelter, but it also displaces organisms into adjacent zones because the subway is connected. A rat chased from one station can move down the line. Roaches flushed by a chemical treatment can retreat deeper into wall voids, then reemerge later. So the night shift does not end the ecosystem. It rearranges it. Now imagine you are a rat again, because it helps to feel the rhythm. You are tucked into a recess beside a cable tray. You are pressed against concrete that holds the day's heat. Your whiskers twitch in the moving air. You wait for the last rush. You wait for the long, quiet gap. Then you move. You do not run randomly. You follow edges, because edges mean cover. You use your memory, because rats have good spatial learning. You know the path to a platform bin that often overflows. You know the timing of the last trains. You know which areas are visited by humans even at night. You reach the bin zone and you forage quickly. A few crumbs, a piece of fried food, a smear of sauce. You are not picky. Picky is a luxury. Then you hear it, the sound that means cleaning cart. Not danger like a predator. Danger like unpredictable human movement. You retreat and you wait again. This is the rhythm of subway life. Exploit the gaps. Avoid the peaks. Now, a smaller creature experiences the night differently. A cockroach does not rely as much on hearing or vibration. It relies on chemical cues and darkness. It is attracted to warmth and moisture, and it avoids open, bright spaces. At night, with fewer humans, it can cross exposed areas more safely. It can move between hiding spots without being crushed, hopefully. So the roach's foraging window expands. And that is why people who work nights in stations sometimes see more of these creatures. It is not because night creates them. It is because night reveals them. The day hides them behind your noise. Now, because this is Sleepless Scientist style, I have to give you at least one mildly sardonic truth. Humans like to pretend that infrastructure is sterile and pests are invaders. But if you build a warm, connected, food-supplied tunnel system under a city and you run it every day, you have built habitat. You have built a very expensive, very loud burrow network. Congratulations. Now, there is a softer point here too. The subway teaches you what nature actually is. Nature is not only trees and birds. Nature is resource flow plus organisms that exploit it. So a tunnel can be nature. A drain can be a wetland. A wall crack can be a cave. A platform light can be a fake sun that attracts moths. And if that idea feels unsettling, that is fair. Humans like categories. We like clean lines between natural and artificial, safe and unsafe, above and below. The subway dissolves categories. It is built environment behaving like ecosystem. Now, let's follow one more thread of the surface feeding the underground, because it is too practical to ignore. Garbage management. The way a station handles trash changes the local ecology dramatically. Covered bins reduce access for pests. Frequent emptying reduces food availability. Poorly sealed trash rooms become warm feeding stations for rodents and insects. Even the design of the bin matters. A bin with a wide open top invites scavengers. A bin with a narrow slot is harder to exploit. And the placement matters too. If bins are near walls and corners, rats can approach under cover. If bins are in open areas with good lighting, risk is higher. So human design choices shape animal behavior. And because rats are intelligent and adaptable, they respond quickly. They learn what works. They learn where the safest approach is. Urban ecology is often a story of learning, not just by humans, by everything. Now think about the food itself. In older eras, subway trash might have been different. Less plastic packaging, different diets, different kinds of crumbs. Modern trash includes more processed foods, higher sugar residues, more oils. That changes what microbes feed on and what insects are attracted to. Sugar residues support certain microbial growth. Oils can persist as films and feed different organisms. Packaging can create hiding places, little shelters, if it ends up in track beds. So the city's diet becomes part of the underground environment. It is a quiet form of cultural ecology. Now, speaking of cultural patterns, there is also the question of cleaning frequency and funding. Not glamorous, but important. Stations with more resources and more frequent deep cleaning may have fewer visible pests and less accumulated grime. Stations with less frequent cleaning may accumulate more organic debris in corners, supporting larger populations of scavengers. This is not a moral failing of a station. It is infrastructure economics turned into ecology. Life responds to what is available. Now, let's pivot toward the idea of tracks as pathways again, but in a gentler, more expansive sense. The subway is a map that moves. It connects neighborhoods that might be separated by highways, rivers, or simply distance. Above ground, some organisms are limited by those barriers. Below ground, different barriers apply. The subway corridor can allow movement of some animals that would avoid open streets. Rats, obviously, but also some other small mammals in certain cities depending on access points. Even if they do not live deep in the tunnels, They may use entrance areas, service corridors, and connected basements to move, so the subway can contribute to the spread of urban wildlife, including pests. It can also contribute to the spread of invasive insects through connected infrastructure. This is one reason pest management in cities often has to be coordinated. Treating one building or one station may not solve a problem if the broader network remains a reservoir. The network is the point. Now, you might wonder, do any beneficial creatures use the subway? It depends what you mean by beneficial. Spiders, for example, can reduce the number of flying insects near lights. They are predators, and they do what predators do. Some microbial communities may even help break down organic residues, reducing smells, not in a way you will applaud, but in a way that makes chemistry slightly less offensive. Even rats, in a cold ecological sense, are part of urban nutrient cycling. They consume waste. They redistribute nutrients. They are prey for some urban predators above ground, like raptors. But you do not need to romanticize them. You can simply accept that they exist because conditions allow. Now, let's narrow your attention to a single station again, because this story is about details. Look at the seams between tiles. Those seams are not just aesthetic. They are moisture traps. They hold dust. They hold spilled liquid residues after evaporation. They provide micro-shelter from cleaning wipes. So, seams can host microbial communities that differ from the tile surface itself. A smooth tile dries quickly and is wiped easily. A grout seam is porous and retains moisture longer. That small difference matters to microbes because moisture is time. Time to metabolize. Time to divide. So the subway has microbial geography at the scale of millimeters. Now, look at the underside of a bench. The underside is shaded and less disturbed. It collects dust differently. It can be slightly warmer due to trapped air and proximity to human bodies sitting, so it can become a stable microhabitat. Look at the edge where the wall meets the floor. Dust accumulates there because airflow slows. Cleaning tools may miss it. Water from mopping may collect there briefly, so it becomes a linear habitat strip, like a hedgerow for tiny life. Edges, edges, edges. The subway is an edge machine. Now, speaking of edges, let's consider the ultimate edge, the boundary between dry and wet. You find a damp patch near a drain. The concrete is darker. The air smells more mineral. There may be a faint slime sheen, a biofilm. Biofilms are microbial cities. They are communities of bacteria and other organisms embedded in a matrix they secrete, a protective gel. Biofilms form where water is present regularly and nutrients are available. Drains are ideal. In a drain, water brings in organic matter and dissolved nutrients. The surface stays wet. The biofilm grows, and it can become surprisingly resilient. This is why drains sometimes smell. It is not just stagnant water. It is metabolism. Biofilms can also be habitats for small larvae, like drain flies. Those tiny flies, the ones that look like fuzzy specks, can lay eggs in biofilms. The larvae feed on the organic material. Then adult flies emerge, and they become prey for spiders or other predators. A little food web anchored on a drain. Now, in the context of subway tunnels, drains, and sump pits are also important for managing groundwater and stormwater. They are functional infrastructure. But function creates habitat. Everything functional creates habitat. Now, let's drift toward the larger scale map again, because the outline wants the idea of quiet movement and accidental migration. Imagine you are riding the line from one end to the other. Station after station, the architecture changes slightly. Materials shift, lighting changes, depth changes, but the rhythm stays. That rhythm allows organisms to treat the system as a continuous space, even if each station is a different microclimate. The train itself is a moving node in that network. It touches every station. It exchanges air and particles. It receives hands and gives hands back. So trains are ecological connectors, not just transportation. Now, consider something subtle. The effect of platform screen doors. In systems that have them, the platform is more separated from tunnel airflow. The piston effect from trains is reduced at the platform. That can change dust distribution, temperature, and humidity patterns. It can reduce the amount of tunnel dust reaching passengers. It can also change how insects move between tunnel and platform zones. So design changes can shift ecology. Similarly, changes in braking technology can alter particulate matter. Some newer trains use regenerative braking more, converting motion back into electrical energy instead of heat and brake pad wear. That can reduce some types of brake dust, but wheel-rail friction still exists, and other wear particles still occur. The details vary. The point is that engineering decisions shape the underground atmosphere, and the underground atmosphere shapes life. Now, let's keep moving forward toward the night shift, but we are not done with pathways yet, because there is another kind of pathway, not for animals, but for sound. Sound travels along tunnels. Low-frequency vibrations carry through the ground. For animals like rats, that vibration is information. For insects, vibration can be stress, but also a cue. Some insects respond to vibration by freezing or moving. It depends on species, so the subway's constant vibration becomes part of the habitat signal. It is like living near a constant drumbeat. You either adapt, or you leave, or you never survive in the first place. Now the station grows quieter again, and you hear more of the infrastructure. A distant fan, a faint drip, a low electrical hum. You can almost imagine the system breathing even when trains are sparse. Air is being moved through ducts and shafts. Heat is being managed. Moisture is being handled, or not handled, depending on the day. And in that quieter hour, the ecology becomes less about migration and more about residence. Who actually lives here versus who is only passing through. Rats can be residents. Some spiders can be residents in calmer corners. Microbes are residents everywhere. But many insects are transients, carried in and dying out. Many plant materials are transients ground into dust. So the subway ecosystem is a mix of stable residents and constant visitors. That is true of many ecosystems, actually. Even forests have transient species and residents. The subway just makes it feel more transactional. Now, there is one more slow, important idea: the subway as a selective environment. If you are an organism trying to persist here, you need certain traits. You need tolerance to drying, because many surfaces dry quickly. You need tolerance to temperature fluctuations, because stations warm and cool with schedules. You need tolerance to chemical exposure because cleaning residues exist. You need the ability to hide in crevices because open space is disturbed. So the subway selects for generalists and survivors. It is not a place for delicate specialists unless the niche is very stable. That is why you see similar pest species across many cities. Rats, roaches, some flies. These are species that have already evolved alongside humans, and they are good at using human spaces. So, in a way, the subway is not creating new life. It is providing a stage for life that is already adapted to us, a co-evolution story told in crumbs and cracks. Now, let's glide toward the late-night maintenance again, because you can hear it starting. A vehicle moves along the tracks in the distance, slower than a train. A work light flashes, not the steady platform light, but a harsher, more focused beam. This is when humans become the nocturnal animals. Maintenance crews enter the tunnels, inspect cables, grind rails, fix leaks, patch concrete, replace bolts. They do it when trains are not running, because the tunnel is a dangerous place when the piston wind and high voltage are active, and their presence changes everything temporarily. They bring bright lights into dark corridors. They bring noise into quiet sections. They bring fresh materials and new dust. Rail grinding, for example, produces fine metal particles. It is necessary for keeping rails smooth and reducing noise and wear, but it adds to particulate matter locally, at least for a time, until it settles or is ventilated away. So the night shift does not simply clean. It can also generate new debris. The subway is constantly renewing its own dust. Now imagine you are a microbe on the wall near a grinding site. You are covered by dust. Then a night comes when the air is full of fresh metal particles, and some settle into your microhabitat. Metal can be toxic to some microbes at high concentrations, but many are tolerant. Some even use metal chemistry as part of their metabolism in specific environments. In the subway, most microbes are not doing exotic metal respiration, like in deep-sea vents. But metal particles can still influence which microbes survive because surfaces become more abrasive and chemically different. So maintenance changes selection pressure. This is ecology at the pace of city budgets. Now, the outline wants us to spend more time in the night shift later, and we will. But before we fully sink into that midnight rhythm, there is one more pathway story to hold. It is the story of accidental migration across neighborhoods, not by animals walking, but by you carrying tiny things that never asked for a ticket. You grab the same pole every day. You sit in the same seat. You lean against the same wall near the same door. Your routine is consistency. Consistency makes you an excellent vector, meaning a carrier. If a microbe is common on a surface in one neighborhood, it has more chances to travel with you to another. If an insect egg is stuck to a delivery box moved through the system, it can end up anywhere along the line. Most of the time, nothing happens. The organism fails to establish. Conditions are wrong. But occasionally, enough conditions align that a small population takes hold. This is how urban ecosystems change. Slowly, not with a single dramatic invasion, but with constant low probability events repeated millions of times. The subway is a machine for making low probability events eventually happen. Now, let that thought sit gently, because it is one of those truths that applies to everything. When you repeat a process long enough, even rare outcomes become inevitable. Congratulations! You live in a statistical universe, and in that statistical universe, the subway keeps moving life around while pretending it is only moving you. Now the station is quieter still. The announcements are fewer. The crowd is thin. You hear a distant train, and the sound takes longer to arrive, as if the tunnel has more space now. And in this thinner, later hour, you start to sense the tunnel's exhale approaching, not as a metaphor, but as a real shift in airflow. When trains run less frequently, the piston effect becomes less continuous. Ventilation systems may become the dominant airflow driver. Temperature gradients change slightly as heat input drops. The station cools, sometimes by a small but noticeable amount. Humidity can shift too, depending on outside conditions and ventilation. So the subway's night is not just quieter, it is physically different air. Different air means different microbial activity. Less warmth can slow growth. Less human presence means less fresh skin oil on poles and seats. Less food dropped means scavengers have to work harder. But the quiet also means fewer disturbances, which allows some organisms to move and feed more freely. So the night is both scarcity and opportunity, and you, still here in your mind, are watching an ecosystem switch modes, the way a reef switches when the sun goes down. Not with beauty and coral fish, unfortunately, with concrete and rats and microbial films. Cozy cosmic horror, but make it municipal. The tunnel does not care. It never cared. It only offers conditions, and conditions select outcomes. Now you start to walk along the platform again, and you notice the service doors more. The ones marked with warnings. The ones most commuters ignore. Behind those doors are the back rooms of the subway. Utility corridors, electrical rooms, storage spaces, pump rooms. These rooms can be ecological strongholds. They are warmer, often. They are less disturbed by passengers. They can have consistent moisture if pipes run through. They can contain cardboard, fabric, and stored materials that become food or shelter. So behind the scenes, the ecology can be richer than on the platform itself. It is like the difference between a living room that gets cleaned and a closet that does not. Now, consider pump rooms specifically. Subway systems often need pumps to remove infiltrating water. Some pits collect water. Pumps move it out. That creates a stable, wet habitat in an otherwise dry environment. Microbes thrive. Invertebrates can find a home. In some cases, you can even find small aquatic organisms in standing water, depending on how persistent it is. Not fish, usually. More like larvae and worms and things that live in thin films. So, the subway can contain tiny aquatic ecosystems, hidden behind doors, maintained unintentionally by the constant failure of water to respect boundaries. Now, because we are keeping this calm, we will not linger on the worst-case scenarios. Flooding happens in some systems, and it is dramatic and dangerous. And it changes everything fast. But even without floods, the slow drip is enough to build habitat. Drip by drip, the city grows its underground wetlands. Now, speaking of wetlands, let's make you the water again, because water is the best narrator of infrastructure. You are a droplet that fell on the street during a rain. You rolled across asphalt, picking up a bit of tire residue and dust. You slipped through a grate near a station entrance. You fell into a drainage channel, carrying your little chemical story. You moved through pipes, You pick up dissolved minerals. You brush past biofilms that taste you, metabolize a fraction of what you carry. You are pumped out eventually, maybe to a sewer system, maybe to a treatment plant. You were never meant to be here, but you are here often enough that the system expects you. And organisms expect you too. They build their lives around your arrival. That is the strange intimacy of the underground. It is built on unwanted water that keeps showing up like an ex who knows your schedule. Now, the next part of the journey will keep sinking into the late night, when the tunnels truly change character. But for now, you are still in that in-between hour, where a final train might arrive, where a cleaner might pass, where the station is neither fully public nor fully private. You can feel the system preparing. The light is steady, but the human presence is thinning. The air feels slightly less humid. The echoes last longer. And in the corners, where edges meet edges, small lives are getting ready to move. A spider adjusts its web in a calmer draft. A roach tests the boundary of a shadow. A rat listens to the rails for the next vibration signature. The subway is about to belong to its other residents again, at least until morning brings the big animals back with their coffee, their impatience, and their endless supply of crumbs. And as you linger in this quieter station, you notice the most honest sound down here. Not the train, not the announcements, but the steady, unromantic drip of water